This presentation is a summary of the results of a single subject design experiment. This was submitted in March 2014 in partial fulfillment of the Masters of Science in Social Work at the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. So the agenda for the presentation is as follows. First, I'll discuss the problem statement and frame the research question. Then I'll go over the intervention description. I'll cover the research methodology, including a discussion of the design and measure that was used. We'll review the results of the project and then close with a discussion and conclusion. So my professional interest is in the area of substance abuse treatment, so in conceiving this project I was interested in finding out how exercise might be incorporated as an adjunct to substance abuse treatment and relapse prevention. As I began to research the issue, what I found was that several theories of cognitive and social learning hold that people drink and use drugs because they lack basic coping skills necessary for dealing with daily stressors. In fact, studies have shown that high levels of stress correlate strongly to hazardous alcohol use, harmful behaviors toward alcohol, and frequency of benzodiazepine, cocaine, marijuana, and opiate use. More broadly, substance abuse is a major problem in this country. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, 23.9 million people in the United States are current illicit drug users, and of these, an estimated 22.2 million were classified with substance dependence or abuse in the past year. Further complicating matters, spontaneous remission rates from substance use disorders are very low. And in fact, relapse rates range from 60 to 90% in the first year following treatment. So finding an effective way to deal with factors that give rise to substance use and substance use relapse, such as stress, is of utmost importance. Exercise has been recognized as a highly recommended lifestyle change activity and has been offered as a possible relapse prevention strategy. Some researchers have stressed the importance of helping clients develop positive addictions, such as increased physical activity and meditation. And even though lifestyle modification is one of the main components of Marlat's relapse prevention model, this element has received the least attention in substance abuse treatment programs. Exercise has a number of benefits, and it's believed that it targets a number of risk factors that contribute to substance use relapse. The one I'm interested in exploring here is stress. And studies have shown that exercise is associated with reduced reactivity to stress on both subjective and physiologic measures. So this brings me to the research question, which is, does aerobic exercise reduce perceived stress? The subject was a 31-year-old Caucasian female whom I recruited from work. She is a colleague of mine. She was chosen because in a pretest she demonstrated moderate acuity in the dependent variable, and so she was a good candidate for the intervention. The intervention itself was moderate intensity aerobic exercise undertaken 3 times weekly for 30 minutes a session. The subject was given a description from the Centers for Disease Control website of what activities and exercises constituted moderate activity, and the frequency and duration of the intervention was selected by reviewing other studies to have used aerobic exercise as an intervention. The intensity, the frequency, and duration of the intervention was also something that the subject felt she could do and was willing to do. The subject was provided a 1-month membership to a local fitness center for the purpose of completing the intervention, and her compliance was monitored by providing her a written aerobic activity log, and on that she tracked the date, she described the aerobic activity, the location and the duration of the activity. This log was collected at the end of the intervention period, and I also sent her regular text messages reminding her of the exercise days. And of course, the goal of the intervention was to reduce the subject's perceived stress. The design was an A-B design. The baseline phase was 2 weeks consisting of 7 measurements, and the intervention phase was 4 weeks and consisted of 13 measurements. The dependent variable was measured using the perceived stress scale. This scale measures the extent to which recent life events are perceived as stressful. The version I used is a 10-item inventory. Each item is scored from 0 to 4, with 0 being never and 4 being very frequent. Some of the items are reverse scored. The responses are added up, and higher scores correspond to higher levels of perceived stress. So there is a linear relationship there. Here are some sample items from the scale. In the last few days, how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? And another example, in the last few days, how often have you felt nervous and stressed? As far as the psychometrics go, the perceived stress scale has been found to have adequate internal and test-retest reliability and construct validity. It has been found to correlate in the predicted way with other measures of stress. The subject completed the perceived stress scale at regular intervals each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the late afternoon. She completed the inventory using paper and pen on her own, and I also sent her text message reminders to complete the inventory on these days. So here are the results. If we do a visual analysis here, we can first look at the level or the amount or the magnitude of the dependent variable. So we're kind of asking here, has the amount of the dependent variable changed from the baseline to the intervention period? And one way to summarize the level into a single observation is to calculate the mean of the baseline scores and the mean of the intervention scores. And it's okay to use the mean here because there are no real outliers that would skew the results. Otherwise, we might use the median. So using this method, the mean of the scores in baseline is 18, and the mean of the scores in the intervention is 14.9. So there has been a decrease in perceived stress between baseline and intervention when level is quantified in this way. Another way to look at this data is to consider the trend, which refers to the direction and the pattern of the data points. And one of the simpler methods that can be used to assess trend was developed by William Nugent. And he suggests that when the trend is linear, drawing a straight line connecting the first and the last data points in baseline and in the intervention phase, and then comparing the direction of these lines. You can see I've done that here, and in the baseline it is a straight line using this method, and in the intervention there is a slight downward trend. Looking at variability, which is how different or divergent the scores are within phases, you can see that the range of scores in the baseline is from 20 to 15. Not necessarily bad in terms of range, but this is problematic because of how the data was trending towards the end of the baseline period. You can see there was a downward trend, and that jumped back up with the last measurement. So this calls into question whether it's safe to conclude that the trend was stable in baseline, and this is an issue that goes to internal validity, and I'll discuss that in more detail shortly. As far as variability in the intervention, no major issues here. The data ranges from 16 to 13, with none of the higher scores in the 18, 19, or 20 range that were seen during the baseline period. So based on the data alone, I think it could be said that aerobic exercise may have had some influence in reducing the subject's perceived stress. This conclusion is strengthened by the subject's own statement in debriefing. There, she said she felt that the intervention had helped with her stress. In looking at fidelity, it does appear on the subject's exercise logs that she adhered to the regimen in terms of frequency. However, it looks like many times she engaged in more vigorous exercise than was required, such as jogging, for longer periods of time than was required, such as 45 minutes instead of 30 minutes. So if this study were replicated, it might be better to actually monitor the subject's exercise directly, and I might even consider taking some physiologic measures like heart rate to monitor the intensity. As far as internal validity, this could have perhaps been strengthened had there been an opportunity for me to take more measurements in the baseline period, particularly if those measurements had restabilized. Normally, with repeated measures and a stable baseline, threats to internal validity are controlled. Specifically, problems of maturation, instrumentation, statistical regression, and testing, all of this may be controlled because patterns which illustrate these threats should be revealed in the baseline. And again, in this case, the downward trend, particularly in the desired direction at the end of the baseline, makes ruling these threats out more difficult. With that being said, even if we assume that the baseline was stable, history still remains as a threat to internal validity. In any A-B design, repeated measurement in the baseline will not control for an extraneous event that occurs between the last baseline measurement and the first intervention measurement. It could be there were other issues causing stress during the baseline period. So the removal of these confounding variables over time may have influenced the results. Another point to mention here goes to the rate of the downward trend in the intervention phase. The decrease in perceived stress during the intervention phase is somewhat delayed. It's a slow downward trend. So this makes it more difficult to interpret the results because it's not obvious that the reduction occurred due to the introduction of the independent variable. It may be that some other factor was at play. At the same time, it may be that the independent variable has a cumulative effect that reduces the dependent variable over time rather than immediately. With these data, there's no way to say for sure. If I were limited to a single subject design, a multiple baseline design would aid in ruling some of these doubts out and aid in analyzing what's going on here. As far as external validity, as with most single subject designs, it's really limited. This could be improved with replication or through group design. So the results here have some important implications for social work practice, particularly in the field of substance abuse treatment. Assuming that exercise can reduce perceived stress, many forms of exercise like running, brisk walking, swimming require minimal expense and could represent major cost savings to both clients and programs in terms of using exercise as an adjunct to treatment or in aftercare. Another point is that even though there are a limited number of studies to evaluate the effectiveness of exercise as an adjunct to treatment, those that have emerged in recent years show improved substance use outcomes, improved cardiovascular fitness, and participant acceptability of the interventions. So based on all of this, I would make the following recommendations. First, this study corroborates the results of other studies which have demonstrated that moderate intensity aerobic exercise reduces perceived stress. In the future, I might increase the dose and frequency of the independent variable to monitor any influences this may have on the dependent variable. and this could even be accomplished in an A, B, C, D type design with a single subject. Given the influence of stress on substance use relapse, I would be interested to include subjects who have been diagnosed with substance use disorder, and the dependent variable could include measures of drug and alcohol use in addition to perceived stress. And finally, as I stated earlier, a group design of this study would be a good way to control for a number of threats, especially to history, and it would improve external validity. These are the references that I used in completing this presentation and designing the study, and thank you for taking the time to review the results with me.